Now, Nigeria has great opportunities to expand the power generation capacity across all different generation sources, from gas to renewables and hybrid power plants. That's according to Oluwatoyin Abegunde. She is the Regional Commercial Development Executive for the Aero-derivative Segment at GE Power Systems. She discussed the opportunities in Nigeria's power sector value chains with CNBC Africa's Lubabalo Mashiqana. Take a look.
Currently, Nigeria generates about 3,000 megawatts. But then if you look at the demand projection, it's estimated to be somewhere around 40,000 megawatts to 50,000 megawatts. So you see the big gap between the demand and the supply. And so, if you look at Nigeria, it will always be a country where, there are great opportunities to expand the power generation capacity, right? And this goes across all the different generation sources, from gas to renewables, to also hybrid power plants, gas, fossils, and also renewables. So, Nigeria will continue to be relevant in terms of the gas market and the power market broadly. Of course, there's still some challenges around policy, around tariffs, around also getting gas available, gas infrastructure. All of this the government is working on to ensure that the infrastructure is built to get gas going all the way from the value chain, from gas production to generation, and then also power transmission and distribution. So for us in GE, Nigeria remains a very important country for us, to position ourselves across the entire value chain, not just in the power generation space. So Nigeria is very strategic.
What's standing in the way of seeing cost-reflective tariffs in Nigeria?
So I mean, it's an interesting topic, right? And I see it as a chicken and egg situation where we don't have enough power. The people, clearly demand for more power, but we also see that there is not a willingness actually to pay. A lot of the distribution companies today, their collection rates, hovers around between 30 to 35%, right? And then the question is, if you get more power, through the distribution network, they only get 35% of the payment, right? And then on top of that, the tariff is not cost reflective. So right now, I know the government is looking at it. There's a political will to review that. Now that the elections are over, I think clearly the government is going to have to sit at the table and review the tariffs based on the MITO framework, and also based on the movements that we've seen on the foreign exchange, and ensure that the cost is reflective. And I believe that once the cost is reflective, we'll be able to attract more investment actually along the value chain. So it's a challenge, right? Do you increase the tariffs before you increase the power generation, or do you increase power generation before you increase the tariff? In my mind, I think we need to increase the tariff first of all, and then we can get more people to actually invest in power generation. So it's critical. The government is looking at it. Because of the elections, they pulled back a bit, but I think now they will look at it more closely.
Now, mostly of what is being talked here about today is independent power producers. Yeah. Has that crept in Nigeria?
That is actually it's a very big space in Nigeria. It's a space that we are also quite active as GE. And the reason is, if you look at the grid power, like I said, it's hovering somewhere around 3,000 megawatts. Clearly, there is a need for industries to have reliable power. And then with all the power cuts that we experience in Nigeria, a lot of the industries, are actually not connected to the grid anymore. And what they've done is basically to set up captive power plants, either based on gas or based on diesel. And based on that, they have better control on the power supply. So it's a very big segment in Nigeria. Actually, there are estimates that about 30 to 40,000 megawatts is generated today in the captive space versus the 3,000 megawatts, on the grid connected space. So clearly, I think it's a big area. Embedded power generation is another evolving area where you can have power generation facilities connected to the discos and dispatched actually to the end customer. So it will continue to be a very important segment of the market. I think as we get more power generated, right, on the grid, the suppressed demand that we experience today, we can actually get more visibility into getting industries, expand their portfolio, expand also their operations, and really build that out for the country.
What has been the root cause of the current power cuts that have been experienced in Nigeria?
So depending on who you talk to, you will get different responses. But clearly, there's a shortage of shortage of supply. So that's one of the big reasons why there are power cuts, right? Then the second reason is clearly around, the state of the infrastructure. The distribution infrastructure is a bit aged and needs a lot of revamping. The same thing with the transmission equipment. And this was one of the reasons why actually the sector was privatized, so that we can get more private equity, private capital going into distribution and transmission, sort of to revamp the system. So I would say those are the three big reasons why we have power cuts. The supply is not sufficient, right? So it has to be rationed. And then the second is really the tripping of the distribution infrastructure and then the transmission infrastructure as well.
Lastly, what initiatives are being embarked on by the private sector together with the government to ensure that they deal with this particular problem?
Yeah. So, I mean, GE, for example, is quite active in, number one, advocating with the government, getting them to see, ideas in terms of what they could do to sort of solve the challenges. And we're not just only playing in an advisory role, we're also playing actually actively as a developer, working with private sector, working with the government to get them to position themselves across the value chain. And then also, we have a lot of entrepreneurs actually that are interested also in investing in the sector who do not have a lot of experience around power generation. We provide very strong, advisory roles to them, project development support, just so that we can handle them based on the experience that we have, to take them through the process. So, and GE is not the only private company actually active in the sector. I see a lot of private sector investments going into advocacy, a lot of private sector investment going into, advising also the discos as well. And then also, looking at funding schemes that could actually encourage more entrepreneurs into the power sector. So it's a lot of work that we're doing. And we're hopeful that the power sector in Nigeria sort of will reach its full capacity, right? And be able to translate into results, and translate also into results for the investors, number one, translate it also into sustainable power for the consumers, and then also translate also into clearly wins and being a success story in the region.